I've been asked to show you how to make a bag to house your knitting needles and crochet hooks, and this is what I've come up with. It's a really simple bag to make actually. It's fully lined, it's got a zip, and it's nicely padded so it keeps its shape. And there's plenty of room to keep your yarns, your knitting needles, your crochet hooks. You could of course make this smaller or adapt the pattern to make it a little bit larger. So let's show you how I made this one. So I need 4 pieces of fabric, 2 pieces for the outer, for the outside of the bag, and then 2 pieces for the lining. And what I've done with the outside of the bag, because it's quite fine cotton, this is Tilda fabric, I've put some fusible wadding onto the back of it. This is what it's like. It's about 1/8 of an inch thick, and it's just going to give it a little bit of stability so it stands up a little bit better. You know which side is the glue side because it's the knobbly side. So iron that with a hot iron with no steam onto the wrong side of your fabric, just until it's all stuck. And then you'll have this. Now the other thing that I've done is to cut out a square piece of card which measures exactly 2 inches square. And I'm going to draw around the corner. Now my outer fabric and my lining measures 21.5 inches long, and that's by 9 inches deep. I think most of your knitting needles should fit inside there. If you're in centimetres, that's 55 centimetres long by 22.5 centimetres deep. And my 2-inch square, which is a perfect 2-inch square, would be 5 centimetres. So draw around each one of the corners and then cut that out. And that's on both sides, straight through the wadding, and I'll do the lining in just a second. And this is what's going to make the bag a box shape. So it is important that all of these squares are exactly the same size. So that's the outside of my bag. I'll save those bits. And then do the same with the lining. So again, draw around my template. You could use air erasable pens for this if you're concerned about seeing the pen mark, but I don't think you will. I think your biro will be fine. And I'm cutting through both layers of lining fabric at the same time with this one. So, one. I'm saving these little squares because I might do some patchwork with those. And 2. Oops, come out. 3rd corner. And that's my final side. Right. Now the first thing I'm going to do is to pop the zip in. So I'll ignore the lining for 1 second and get the outside of my bag. Do be aware that if you've got a pattern that has to be a certain way round, then get that the right side around. I've got a continuous zip. I like this type of zip because you can just cut off as much as you need and then put the slider on. So it's a little bit longer than I need, but I'll explain why I like to do that in just a second. But I just want to arrange this so I know that I've got the zip facing the right way and I've got my fabrics the right way. So that's how I want the outside of the bag to look. So if I take the one side first, flip it over, and then I'm going to sew with my zipper foot on my machine all the way down the side like so. So I'll just take the foot off I have on there and put the zipper foot on. Now if you wanted to pin, that's fine. I'm just going to line up the edges of the edge of the zip with the edge of my fabric. This is one with a wadding on it, and stitch about halfway down the tape, what I will do is to move that slider right out of the way while I'm attaching this side. And that's the beauty of using a zip that's too long. The slider's not going to get in the way of my sewing. Right, so line those edges up. And so, let's slow that down a little bit. Make sure they're nice and straight. If you wanted to pin that and tack that first, that's fine. But for speed's sake, I'm just going to go with it. Okay, so that's the one side. Then I need to put the opposite side, making sure that my fabric's in the right direction, so I'll double check that that's how it's going to sit. Flip that over and sew the sides of this side of the zip together. Make sure that those seams here, or the edges of the fabric, line up, so that's a straight line. And then again, sew down the other side. Now these stitches aren't going to be seen, so they could be quite a long stitch. These aren't the ones that are going to secure the zip in place. That'll be the next ones when I put the lining section in. So just make sure that those meet up. Now that's the outside of my bag. Just don't want to lose that slider, so I'll move that in a little bit. So that's how we're looking at the moment. So that's the outside of my bag. I'd normally press that now, but I'm just going to turn this over to put the lining on the inside. And I'll do the same as with the outside, just so that I can kind of get my head around where the lining is going to go. So I want one piece that way, and then the other piece will go there. So if I flip over the lining and take the edge of my zip and my fabric here, then I'll need to sandwich the zip in between the lining and the outer fabric. So my lining's facing in and I've got the back side of the outer fabric, if you like. So again, if you want to pin it, that's fine. Line up the edges here, so that those corners that I cut out are all straight. And I'm going to sew this time slightly inside the previous stitch line. So this is the stitch line that you're going to see. And I can actually feel, even though there's the wadding in here, I can feel the edge of the foot up against the coil of the teeth. So I know that it's going to look nice and straight from the right side when I turn it the right way round. So just make sure we're all lining up. And the beauty is when you're sewing in zips like this, if it doesn't look perfectly neat when you turn it the other way around, you can always go over the stitch line again. If there's any missing bits or your stitch line isn't straight, it's not the end of the world. That's just going to take me down the side of my zip, and you can see here the way that the edge of the zip, the edge of the foot is lining up against the coil of the teeth. That's what I'm feeling when I'm actually sewing that in place. So when I open this up now, I should just see, again, that's the outside, and that's the section that I've just sewn on the inside. So now I need to do the same on the opposite side. So that's how I want my lining to look. Flip it over, pinch the zip, so the zip's going to be in the centre and my lining is facing inwards, and line up again all those square boxes that I just cut out. And we'll do the same on this side. And sew all the way down. Again, lining that foot up with the coil of my zip. And you'll see when you turn this the right way around, whether you've got the stitch line right. It doesn't have to be perfect. Make sure that the fabric that you've already been sewing is out of the way, so you're not going to sew over the wrong side. And again, just feeling my way with the coil of the zip until I come to the end. I'd normally have the iron on at this point so I can keep pressing as I go. There, let's see where we are. So when I open this up, that against the outside, so I can see now if my stitch line is going to look good or not. And this is the lining, and I think that looks pretty good. So the next thing I'm going to do is to bring the zip in, and I'm going to put 2 little ribbon tabs, so I've got something to hold when I pull the zip open or closed. So I'll need a piece of ribbon about 4 inches or about 10 centimetres long. There's no exact science. Fold that in half, and I'm going to lay that face inwards on top of the end of my zip, like so. And I'm just going to pop a pin across there, and then I'll sew it on both sides. So fold in half. So they're both the same length, but folded in half, they're about 2.5 inches or so. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then just over the end of where the ribbon is, I'm going to sew that. Oh, I'll put my regular foot back on again. I don't need the zipper foot anymore. So that goes back in there. Oh, on you go. Sew quite close to the edge, because this is only a tacking or a basting stitch. That's just to hold the ribbon in place. And on the other side. So you won't see these stitches. They're not too important. And if you're using a nylon zip like I am, you should be able to sew straight over the teeth or the coils of the zip. Then I'm going to trim away the excess zip, just back up to where I sewed the ribbon on both sides. Make that nice and neat. Okay, now we're going to start sewing the bag together. So the first thing I'm going to do is to undo the zip so that I can turn it the right way round. So fold over the 2 halves of the outside of the bag together, and I'm going to sew across this short side here, move the lining out of the way. So sew those 2 pieces together. Every time I start to sew and every time I finish, I'm going to do a quick back stitch just to make sure that those stitches aren't going to come undone. Down to the other side and back stitch. I'll sew across the bottom of the bag, so again line up those 2 seams so they're even, and again if you wanted to pin that first it might make it easier for you. Just going to make sure that the wadding doesn't bunch up too much. It may do a little bit and it may stretch a little bit, but it's not a problem. And actually, if you wanted to use a walking foot, that can help to stop your fabric from bunching up. It feeds it through more evenly. But not for this case. Okay, down to the edge and then back tack. And then the final side here is the two shorter sides, and do the same again. Back tack. And back tack. Then I'll go around the lining and do the same. So I'll sew the shorter side together first. And back tack. And back tack. Now the difference here is across the bottom of the bag I need to leave a hole for turning it. So again, it doesn't have to be exact, but I'd say around about 4 inches or about 10 centimetres. So line the two edges up. Oops. Back we go. And around about the centre. So just back tack to strengthen that little bit, and then leave a gap. Back tack. And straight down. And then on the final side here, then we'll start to sew the corners to make it into a box shape. I've used about 1/4 inch seam allowance. It doesn't really matter as long as all the seams are the same. So 1/4 inch or maybe 3 centimetres will be enough. Now the reason I've cut out all of these little squares in the corners is to make the bag a box shape. So what you're going to do is to pull out both sides, line up the seam in the centre, and that should make a straight line, and sew across all 4 corners here. So 2 on the lining. You're going to wet your fingers a bit if it makes it easier. Pull out the both sides, make that, have we got visitors? That's nice. Make that nice and straight. And again with your 1/4 inch seam allowance, back we go. Try and make sure the seam in the centre matches up, because you will see this from the outside. That's the lining. And then do the same with the padded outer section, so pull that open, match up the seams together and sew that straight line. Still going to back tack, because I don't want any of these stitches coming undone, that would be a bit of a shame. So once the bag's finished, you'll have to start unpicking if you've missed any bits like that. Okay, that side. Hello. And then the final corner here, and then we'll do the bit where the zip is. Straight across, and back tack. Now where the zip section is, I'm going to sew this together all in one go. So open out the lining and match up the seam with the zip. Open out the wadding side, the outer side, and match that up. So I'm going to sew across the lining, across where the zip is, and across to the other side. So I'm going to pop a pin in that to hold that all in place. So try and make sure that my seams match up with the zip in the centre. Like so. I always pin across as well, just in case your needle does hit the pin. It's less likely to break if it's pinned across. Oops. And that's so. I've got quite a lot of fabric I'm sewing over here, so I'm going to take it steady. Still back tack. And then I'll take that one out for now. Because here, remember, I've got the ribbon, I've got the zip, I've got the back, the front, the sides, all of those fabrics all lined up together. I'm just evening that out so everything's nice and straight. And then back tack. And then I'll do the same with the opposite side. So that's the outer layer with the wadding. Line that up with the zip so that seam matches with the zip. and there's my lining, so that seam matches with the zip, and just pull those all into place so you get a reasonably straight line. Like so. And sew all of those together. There, so what I need to do now is to, whoops, take that off my bracelet. And then through that opening that I left at the bottom of the lining, I'm going to pull the outside through. Now I just need to make sure that I've caught all of the seams. So that's the bottom of the bag, and you can see how that box shape has come to shape. That's the top of the bag at the end of the zip. So we've got all three layers, both sides there. And then again with the opposite side, so again I'll push out the corners of the base, just make sure I've stitched right into those corners. And then the top of the bag there, where the zip was, that all looks good, very secure. So the next thing I'm going to do is just sew over the hole in the base of the bag. Now you could do this by hand. I don't see the point in the lining because no one's going to see it. But maybe if you're going to sell the bag, or you're giving it as a gift, you just want it to be finished perfectly. In which case, just use a ladder stitch or an over edge stitch and stitch across the opening by hand to close it. But I think you'll find on a lot of bags that you buy, they're stitched up in this way, so that's absolutely fine. Okay, then we'll push the lining into the bag. Again, push out all of those corners to make sure it sits nice and square. Like so. I could give it a final press, snip off my loose threads, and I'm ready to fill with my knitting needles and yarn.